Hello, everyone, and welcome to all of you here in the room and to those of you joining us online for today's hybrid event, Securing the Future of European Industries, the Role of CCUS in the EU's Legislative Term 2024 to 2029. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based here in Brussels. I'm going to be guiding us through today's conversation on CCUS, which is coming at a really important time because last month, along with its recommendation for a 2040 emissions reduction target, the European Commission unveiled its industrial carbon management strategy. This is a big deal for CCUS. The strategy sets out goals and plans to increase investment in carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies. Now, CCUS has been said by the Commission that it will be needed to reach the EU's goal to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. And that's important because net zero means something very specific. It means that any remaining emissions that are still out there in 2050, any remaining CO2 emissions, will be abated or canceled out, if you will, by removing carbon from the atmosphere. Now, that can be done in a couple of different ways. It can be done by planting forests, where you have carbon sinks taking carbon out of the atmosphere, or, and this is what we'll be talking about today, it can be done by capturing the emissions and storing them, for instance, in underground reservoirs. Now, along with the ICMS, the Net Zero Industry Act, which is predating that, also emphasizes the role of CCUS technologies in reaching that 2050 goal and identifies it as a critical solution. However, the Commission's enthusiasm for CCUS hasn't been without controversy, with some questioning whether the technology is viable and cost-effective. So today we're going to talk about the place of CCUS in the EU's climate plans, and we'll hear the CCUS industry's perspective about achieving the CO2 storage targets set by the Commission. So to get us started, I would like to welcome Joop Hazenberg, who is the CCSA EU Director. Joop.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you for coming and joining us online. As many indeed as you already know, we can only get so far with renewable electricity and green electrons to clean up our economy and achieve this, what Dave said, net zero emissions. But this is almost 10 years after the historic Paris Climate Agreement. The EU has now finally fully recognized carbon capture storage as a key technology to decarbonise those industries that cannot be fully electrified. So almost at the end of the current mandate, the Commission, buildings just on the left, published its first carbon management strategy, together with proposed climate targets for 2040. So it's putting high hopes on the potential of CCS, but also on CCU. So for instance, by 2050, almost a third of the captured carbon should be reutilized to make e-fuels and other products. By 2050, Europe will need to capture about 500 million tons of CO2 annually, and that is about 20% of what we emit today. And today, we don't capture any carbon. So we need to plan a revolution. This revolution is going to be a multi-billion euro industry with hundreds of thousands of direct jobs involved, but more importantly, a technology that will harness the competitiveness of Europe's industry. From steel to car making and from wind to batteries, the EU is facing strong competition and headwinds from other parts of the world. So if we get this CCS ecosystem right in the coming years, Europe can specialize and set the standard for low carbon products, such as clean steel, net zero cement, and other projects with a real green label. So in light of this upcoming legislative term of the next Commission, the CCSA are here to present our recommendations on how European policymakers can lay the foundation but for the commercialization of carbon capture, utilization and storage technologies, and deliver really a healthy and robust CCUS market in Europe. There's currently a huge momentum for CCS with over more than 75 market-ready projects. The carbon management strategy, but also the NZIA, that the Net Zero Industry Act that Dave just mentioned, lays the foundation for attracting really large-scale investments in those projects, contributing to increasing the competitiveness of the European economy. But these actions need to be accelerated, and that's why we are today now presenting the CCSA EU manifesto. It's our vision for a stronger, for the next European legislative term, and to really put CCS at the forefront of legislative policy making when it comes to, let's say, the next phase of the Green Deal. Well, as agreed by all institutions in the soon-to-be adopted Net Zero Industry Act, 50 million tons of CO2 to be captured by 2030 and stored, and this figure is going to be going up to about 450 million tons by 2050. It's a projection, it's not just a target. So how do we enable then this route to market for the CCUS technologies to be to reach those objectives? Because right now it's a very expensive technology and the commercialization is tricky. So the CCSA is working on these topics, as we are the trade association in Europe, really working on the commercialization of CCS. And these are the following key steps that are spelled out in our manifesto for the EU member states and neighboring countries need to take during the next 5 years. One, we need better financial schemes to really support CCUS investments. Financing is really key here. CCS projects are very risky. We need guarantees like carbon contracts for difference and more support from the EU, notably a higher and more stable ETS price that also will result in more funding through the Innovation Fund. Secondly, a Europe-wide agreement on carbon capture and storage targets. Once the targets have been set, they should not be changed midway. It's very important. Stability results in more innovation, jobs, and acceleration of industry investments. The current projections of 2040 and 2050 should become real targets. Thirdly, developing an increasing supportive EU policy framework for this whole CCS ecosystem. And the carbon management strategy has set this out, which came out in February, but it needs to now really be materialized, and the next Commission needs to start working on this as a clear priority. 4, advancing international and cross-border cooperation. This is really important because we note that there's almost no dialogue currently ongoing between the EU and the UK on how to create a single CO2 market in Europe. And this is a huge missed opportunity and will only result in more costs for our industries. 5, support low carbon products. I already mentioned this. Europe should not compete on cheap mass production, but rather with high quality products that have a negligible carbon footprint. And finally, but not the least, the building of public support and to improve the communication on projects. Without broad public and political backing, this technology revolution will really not take off. So we look at Denmark and other countries in Northern Europe where there's now broad support and where we see a massive takeoff of these technologies, whereas in other countries the skepticism persists. So ladies and gentlemen, the CCUS will be crucial for the vision of a net zero Europe by 2050. Policymakers across Europe now have only one chance to get it right and create the right regulatory environment and the market conditions to allow this new sector to flourish at the required scale and in a timely manner. With our manifesto that we present today, we want to kickstart this discussion, and we are looking forward to work with you to realize a clean, green and bright future for Europe. Thank you.
Thanks, Joop. And as you mentioned, financing is really, really key here. It's the number one obstacle people talk about when they're talking about CCUS. So we'll get more to that in the panel, which we're going to start now. So I'd like to welcome our panelists now up to the stage. Let me introduce them to you. So here with us today, we have Cedric de Meijs, who is the Vice President of Switzerland-based global building materials and aggregates company Holcim. We have Paolo Testini, who is Director for CCS and Carbon Removal Development at the Italian energy company SNAM, Energy Infrastructure Company. And we have Hanna Roland, who is Head of Sustainability for the Oslo-based CCUS company Aker Carbon Capture. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome Joop as well. Now you all will be able to ask your questions to the panelists yourself using Slido. So if you're here in the room, you'll see there will be, yes, there it is, a QR code there on the screen. You can scan that and type in your questions, and I'll put those questions to the panel. So go ahead and type in your questions now. Any question is fine, and I'll ask it. If you're joining online, same thing, type in your question, I'll put it to the panel. Also, if you're looking for the manifesto that Joop was just talking about, if you're here in the room, you'll find it there on your seats. But you can also find within that Slido link, there's a link to where you can find this manifesto online, which we'll be discussing. Now, Cedric, let me start with a question for you. So for producing net zero cement, right, for the goals of carbon reduction for cement production, big investments are going to be needed in terms of investing into factories. So when you're looking at different options for how you can do that, how does CCUS compare to other possibilities for reducing emissions from cement production?
Great, Dave, thank you. Great question. Look, you mentioned that deploying CCUS is capital intensive. It's also complex from an operational perspective. So in short, the less we have to capture, the better we will be, the better the business case will be. And what does that mean? It means that we have to look and leverage all the carbon reduction levers we have at our disposal for each and every cement plants before we consider CCUS. So that might be defossilizing our energy. That might mean using different formulations and optimizing the use of secondary materials from other industries. That might mean using innovative material like calcined clay that replace more carbon intensive limestones, for example, and so on and so forth. And we need to maximize all of those levers. Now, again, this is not a universal, let's say, shopping list. It depends on where you are, and the ability to do that will vary from cement plant and cement plant depending on the local geology, the local value chain, and so on and so forth. Using today's technology, if we do that, that enables us to put on the market a concrete, we call it EcoPact at Holcim, that is roughly up to minus 50% CO2 intensive compared to, let's say, the average. So CCUS clearly will play a big role for the remainder CO2 that we cannot eliminate through those levers, which are largely what we call process emissions. So it's not energy related. It's due to the material transformation. Now, this being said, CCUS is not either the magic technology for those remaining emissions. Each CCUS project is fundamentally different, has different value chains, because we capture it in a cement plant, but then we have to transport it. And either you use it or you store it geologically, and that requires value chains that we are all together innovating in. We are building those value chains that do not exist, basically. So again, it's on a case-by-case basis, and it's not like we're going to plop CCUS here and there and here and there everywhere. It's really complex, well-targeted projects that are selected in order to bring where we have exploited all these carbon reduction possibilities before and levers that I mentioned, and then implementing CCUS to get to net zero, but on a very targeted basis. So I'll stop there for the time being.
Okay, so that's an important point, that the technologies that you're looking at, first and foremost, you want to reduce the emissions that are produced, because less emissions produced means it's less expensive to store the ones that are remaining. That's an interesting point. Paulo, let's go to you next. So like Cedric was just saying, deploying CCUS requires big investments, and in particular, big infrastructure investments. That's where you come in. So what do you need from policymakers to make those big infrastructure investments happen?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dave, and good morning, everybody, both here in the room and online. As you said, I'm from SNAM, and SNAM is the largest TSO in Europe for natural gas. And in our strategic plan, we basically have 11.5 billion euro investment over 5 years. So it's well above 2 billion per year. So you see, we are a company which basically likes capex. Our business is, making investments. So we do large, let's say, large capex investment, and so we are not scared about that. But your question is, I think, the key question, for CCS. How can we basically enable large projects like CCS projects are, and make company basically in the position to make final investment decision? So I think Joop in his intervention before mentioned a few points. I took a few notes. I mean, he was mentioning, we need public support. We need targets that do not change over the time. Once that you set the targets, we need the policies for the CCS ecosystem. We need to foster international cooperation. We need to promote low carbon products. I mean, I took a few notes, and I think they are in the manifesto. If I have to make like a summary of that, we need long-term visibility. So think about the companies, and here you have the value chain represented. You have technology provider, you have the people who need to make the investment. So the emitters, and Cedric was explaining to you, how costly CCS is. So their target is, to limit the emission that they have to capture to the lowest, possible volumes. And apart from the money, I talk with a lot of emitters in Italy and abroad for the Ravenna project, and then I will give you a few details on that. It's a matter of money, footprint, land consumption, because we are talking about large, plans to capture CCS. So getting to a final investment decision is not easy. And for us at SNAM, we are in partnership with ENI to build the Ravenna CCS, which is the largest CCS project in the southern Europe. We are talking about deploying a multi-billion investment to make that storage. What we need, is long-term visibility. So we need to be sure to put basically down our number and to know that we get, a return from the investment that we are doing, and we will, so that in this way we can allow the CCS value chain to work. So we really need, all of those points that Joop was summarizing to allow long-term visibility. That's basically the ask from the industry to get to final investment decision and then to make the infrastructure.
Hanne, you at Aker are proposing solutions as a service provider for CCUS. So what are the main issues you're encountering when you are proposing these kinds of solutions?
Yes, so good morning. As a dedicated carbon capture company, we talk with a range of different emitters and see the different challenges that they are encountering towards on their journey. And to Cedric's points, I think it's the combination. So that's the first challenge for the emitters. What is the right decarbonization path for us? And it may also vary across the different sites. Now we are on the post-combustion part of the capture technology. And what we see when we talk with the emitters is that it's not a challenge, or they are not the concerns about the technology, but it's rather the fuller picture. So again, picking up the points that you just mentioned, it's about the visibility and the forward sight on what is coming, so predictability. It is the question of, okay, will I have access to the transport and storage for our emissions? How is the support systems or mechanisms going to be, at least for the short term, whereas the expectations that it is needed some help in the transition from where we are coming from, where it actually hasn't been a cost of polluting, to include that in the pricing of either the product or the services. So that is sort of the general concerns of the emitters that we see. And if we think about the different projects that we are delivering today, they are quite different in type when it comes to the full value chain. So we have 3 projects that I would like to just quickly introduce. We have the first one. It is a CCU project, so utilization project. It is a waste to energy company in the Hengelo in the Netherlands. We're actually in hot commissioning now. So how they are going to solve their project is by offtake of the CO2 in the region. So it's going to be used in the greenhouses in the region to yield growth there and displacing the use of natural gas that is used today. Then we have a second project that is the Brevik CCS project in Norway. So that is the cement factory that we have there. That is part of Norway's largest climate project of today. It's called Longship, which entails the full value chain of carbon capture, transport and storage. So a very crucial part when we talk about accelerating the deployment of CCS today is to do both at the same time. I'm sure there's no one debate without talking about the chicken and egg issue when it comes to CCS. So that is what is happening in Norway now, with then the storage site being the Northern Lights that you might have heard about. Then we have the third project, that is the most recent one that was announced last year, and that is Ørsted Kalundborg Hub project, again a CCS project, but this is different because it is a CDR project. So that was enabled both through the funding of the Danish state, but also the sales of carbon dioxide removal credits to enable the business case to move forward. So that is also exciting part and also part of what you talked about. It is really the net zero towards 2050. So we need to talk about both the reduction project and the removal project to come together. In addition, we work with quite a few of waste to energy companies that wish to store the emissions and also to generate the credits. As we know, waste incinerators, they have a mixed stream of flue gas. So it's both the fossil origin and the biogenic origin. And in order for that business case to add up, we need to manage the policies for both reduction and removal. Exciting area and probably something that we can come back to.
Well, Joop, let me get your thoughts on some of the things we've heard so far. So we've heard about some of the obstacles. Of course, that we have this chicken and egg dilemma that we always talk about when we talk about CCUS. What's your reaction to some of what we've heard so far?
Well, the funny thing is that I used to work in this building as a journalist 10 years ago. I was working for Deutsche Presseagentur and I was actually writing about CCS. And this was a decade ago and it was just before the Paris Climate Agreement. And then there was similar talk like this, and now we let's say lost a decade, but the scale of the projects now actually in the pipeline is incomparable to then. So then there were a few projects in England and in the Netherlands, and it was mostly about cleaning up power stations. And now we're really talking about cleaning up all those sectors from cement, from waste to energy, actually developing a project to take carbon directly out of the air. And this is new, and the scale that we see is unprecedented. And even if, let's say, policymakers don't do a lot, there's still a lot of demand from the market to do this. So I'm speaking with a lot of emitters, for instance, also in Spain, and they're like half panicking, like we're going to pay a lot for our ETS credits in the near future, and we need to get rid of our carbon. So we need to make massive investments in adding those CCS, those capture facilities on the ground. And these are hundreds of millions of euros sometimes per one plant. And then we need to also get rid of it. And that's the other part of the value chain that SNAM works on, which is about the transport and then the storage. So for me, I can see that everybody wants to do it, but we're not waiting for policymakers to act. But they really need to make sure that they don't over-regulate nor under-regulate. And this is always a tricky balance, because you also need to take into account what happens on a national level. So one key concern that I have is that around the North Sea, most of the projects are actually located. So this ecosystem is really taking off around the North Sea. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but we have a big risk that we leave the rest of Europe out. Ravenna is one of the notable exceptions for CCS projects in Southern Europe. But if you have a plant in Central Europe or in Eastern Europe, you have nowhere to go and you're really stuck there. So this is also why the Commission says, like, we need to have this CO2-wide, this EU-wide infrastructure for this CO2 to be transported. It can be through big pipes, but it can also be even barges, it can be ships, it can be trucks. There are plenty of opportunities there, but we need to start building everything almost from scratch. And that is a challenge that we have. And also this is about investments for the next 10 to 15 years. So it's really like, crossroads is such a cliche, but this is really like a crunch point where we can make it either a perfect storm or we can make it a perfect solution. So this is really like the next Commission really has only one chance to get it right. I have to repeat this again and again and again.
Yeah. Cedric, you wanted to respond?
It's just to complement in terms of EU policy and what we convey to the policymakers in Brussels is by and large, I've got a long list, but if I summarize it, is two things. First of all, let's make sure that we're given enough flexibility. At Holcim, we pride ourselves to have a portfolio of 6 very mature projects in Europe. These projects are first of a kind. We're together first movers. At the same time, the Commission is working and the institutions are working on secondary legislation that will have an impact on those, but we don't know what these secondary legislation will say. And it must not negatively impact those projects that are mature. You said, we're not capturing in Europe. Let's capture, let's make sure that these first movers projects are being deployed, that the final investment decisions are made. And the projects, and some of those projects, we've been working on it for the last 3, 4, 5 years. They need to see the light. And those that we will start working on in a year or two and thereafter will be different because the value chain will have matured, the technological possibilities we have developed, and it will change. But let's make sure that we come up with projects and regulator give us enough flexibility. And the second one is, we also need to consider beyond just the industrial environment and the CCUS project itself. We're not in the CCUS business. We are providers of construction materials. Our aim is to decarbonise construction, is to put net zero products on the construction market. And one crucial bit here is the accounting frameworks. How do we take into account what we do upstream in our industrial ecosystem in CCUS into the products that we put on the market, and how does the accounting work? And that's the crucial element that we still need to work on all together to make sure that it happens, and the impact actually touches what we aim to do, which is, in our case, decarbonizing construction.
It's interesting what you mentioned, Joop, about, I also, when I first came here to Brussels 15 years ago, and it feels like the conversation about what we used to call CCS, now we call CCUS, hasn't evolved in Brussels, that people who are in the sector know what's happening, but people outside still talk about demonstration projects. And there's this impression that the demonstration projects are all that's out there. And I still hear this certainly from NGOs. Whereas there are actual projects, functioning projects now on the ground. And I think that was part of the Commission's motivation for coming out with the industrial carbon management strategy, was to refocus the debate. So I know that the sector was calling for such a strategy for a long time. Let's talk about the strategy and what kind of difference it's going to make. Hanne, let's start with you, especially as a service provider. This renewed focus on CCUS here at EU level, Norway, not in the EU, but you're active in EU countries, also Norway in the EEA. What kind of a difference do you think this refocusing is going to make for people who are providing CCUS solutions?
Well, I think what is really crucial now is that we see that CCUS is taking into account as part of the solution. So before a while that was, it still needs to be together with a full, let's call it the climate toolbox of what to do with the exchanging the fuels, electrifying and all of that. But it is definitely noted as part of the solution, and with that also being taken care of with all the different legislations that are coming forward. So of course there's a lot of different of these policies and regulations where CCUS actually will have to be managed. But on the positive side here, what we see is at least part of that convergence of the different aspects supporting each other. Now, I think what is really important for the short term, and a bit back to the point here of the first movers, that we have these first movers and it's happening now, but we really need to support the fast followers, as I like to call them. Because if there's not a predictability for them, they are a bit afraid to move too fast, because they know that this coming, this, let's call it the package. It's this change now, fit for 55, fit for 90. I don't know what the new say is going to be, but yeah. Or as I like to say, fit in the 40s. That is my my take on that. But we really need to see how to bring everybody on with us in that transition, that there's no one lost in the gap. Because if the fast followers see that those that just hang on a bit longer get incentives or get support that they will miss out on, that could make them sit on the fence even longer, being afraid of losing out on something. So it's, again, transparency and predictability in that one is really crucial.
I think lots of people wouldn't mind seeing that the Fit for formats ditched maybe for the 90%. Joop, what about you? What kind of difference do you see it making? And you were talking about targets. The strategy is a bit reticent on targets, right? So it's obviously welcome, but would you have liked to see more? I mean, I don't think we could have expected targets in it, but at least more friendly language toward targets.
Well, I mean, this is very EU bubble speak, but it's a strategy, so you cannot really come with a. I don't think we should, let's say, set in stone like this needs to be done by then, but it is important to give at least, I would say, 15-20 year scope of where this market should grow. So, for instance, a 300 million ton target by 2040 and a 500 million ton by 2050. That is something that investors can work, and they react to this. We already see this with the 50 million ton target, which is set in the NZTA as an objective, actually, with let's say a forced contribution from those from the oil and gas industry. That is really setting a lot of things in motion, because then the investors can start counting. Okay, they can start planning, and then they can go to the investors, say like, so the investors can then check whether this is feasible. But right now we don't have a lot of the CCUS directive. CCS directive is from 2008 or 9, I think. It is still not partially implemented by many member states. So we're looking at a framework that is very light. It's wobbly, and only in countries like in the Netherlands and in Norway, where you've had sound public support for projects like Northern Lights, but also the Portus one, you will have actually reached this FID, the final investment decision. If we look at the UK has done a cluster approach. They want to be net zero. They also have their strategy. I think they want to have, 75% greenhouse gas reduction by 2035, something in that range. And they are 1 or 2 years ahead of the EU when it comes to setting up the legislative framework, when having a network code, the cluster approach, but also selecting the winners and say like these are the ones that we will support first. And they're also regulating actually the storage price. So whether this is feasible or not, I don't know. We have to see this in the coming months, but they are doing it right now. And we are now actually trailing behind as EU. And that's why the Commission really needs to step up the game. As you know, the Commission is now setting on this clean transition dialogues with industry leaders from different industries. I've actually been in 3 of them with President von der Leyen, Šefčovič, last week with Vestager to talk. The last one was about clean steel. And a lot of these industries are really in big trouble. They can really leave Europe or just disappear in the next decade or so. And I still see that there's, from the Commission side, I understand like the CCS is a key technology to save those industries. But with those industry leaders, they're still betting on hydrogen or on electrification. And the CCS route is not on the radar. So we have a lot of advocacy to do as CCS. When I applied for this role a year ago, I was also still in this NGO framework of this technology is not taking off. But actually it is. Yeah, so there's a lot of advocacy to be done here.
Well, the other important thing about the strategy, of course, is attracting investment. So let's talk a little bit about the investment landscape. Paulo, I saw you nodding when Joop was saying the importance of public financing being available in order to attract that financing. So how do you think the investment landscape can be improved on CCUS? Because, of course, this has been the big problem historically.
Let me start from, let's say, one comment about what was being said. It's true that, if we think back 10 years, we progressed much less than we were thinking, 10 years ago. But We are also in a different situation. So there are projects which are basically starting. I mean, Porto's got FID a few months ago. Northern Lights is going to start. It's not in the EU, but still, it's close, in Norway. UK has moved forward and is also setting, a reference case that we can look at, to, copy a few of the things that work well and maybe got, a few ideas on how to model the European case. I had the chance to be in Breivik to see the plant that is being built. So it's there, you can look at it. And also in Ravenna, we will actually in a few months start injection of our pilot phase. It's tiny volumes. We are basically capturing volumes from the compression station there, but we will inject underground. It's going to happen in a few months. And it's going to be like basically the first injection in Europe, apart from the projects that have been working for a long time, like Sleipner. So it's going to be an important milestone. And that's basically one project where we are investing upfront, basically taking the risk together with Eni, our partner. That's, let's say, a small pilot phase. We need to move forward, and we need basically to attract investment, So again, when I said before, long-term visibility, another aspect, and I think Cedric was mentioning it, is like the risks connected to the CCS value chain. So that's a bit, we have to acknowledge and we have to be basically transparent, saying, it's not like as plain vanilla as other decarbonization solutions. So we need all of the decarbonization solutions. Some of them are probably much easier from a technological point of view, also because they had, a big support, big subsidies. They had a chance to develop, and nowadays, let me say, renewable power generation, which is great, is quite simple as a technology. So the technology is there. For CCS, we still have some challenges, some risks, and some complexity. And for the projects that are close to start, every day, we see that there are things that need to be addressed. So when you have these risks and this complexity, to attract investment, you need some kind of coverage, some kind of support, some kind of backing that allows, the long-term visibility that investors require. And so if we come up with a framework that gives this kind of, support, I think that the money is there and it will flow in. Because if we want to get to the objective that the EU is setting, and you were mentioning also, the net zero by 2050. And net zero, as you said, means that some emission will still be there because we won't be able to capture all of the emissions. So we'll need to compensate with the negative emission. And to unlock the direct air capture or the bioenergy capture, which basically are the two levers that we have to offset the remaining emission, we need first to move on with CCS, which is easier, which is economically more sustainable because we avoid the cost of the emission, and to basically develop the technology that then will be used to also unlock the negative part of the emission. So again, it's a long-term visibility, and it is the acknowledgement that there are some risks that needs to be addressed in the starting phase for the first mover. And if we basically target them, then I'm pretty sure that the technology will establish itself and make the value chain basically in the money and self-sustainable in a few years. So that's the goal that we need to target.
Cedric, how would you say the investment landscape can be improved right now?
Look, I think it's about demonstrating that it's doable. We've said yes, we can. We've committed, Holcim, we've committed to invest 2 billion in CCUS technology and project deployment by 2030. So we firmly believe into it. In the end, it's about developing this industrial value chain that doesn't exist. We know how to capture at our side, but we need technology providers. We need to work with TSOs that are able to transport the captured CO2 offsite, either for usage or for storage. We need to collaborate with those, if it's geological storage, that will transform the CO2 and storage geologically. We don't do that. And all of that is part of the economic model. All of that is part of this industrial value chain that is currently being developed and where we all try to find our feet and our interest in. And so I think, as I said before, this is a first mover's territory. We need, on the one hand, the stable regulatory framework that we've talked about. We need there are essential pieces into it, like as far as cement is concerned. We need the CBAM. CBAM needs to be effective. If we are to have a reasonable business case for deploying the CCUS technology, we need a solid carbon price. We need the ETS to fulfill its role, and that's part of the business case. So it's an addition of all these different elements that creates your business case and confidence to deploy those projects.
So let's talk a bit about, we all know that there's skepticism about CCUS. So one of the lines of skepticism is that, look, it may be great if we can store emissions underground, but these are enormously expensive projects. And there's some who think, look, this is just an excuse to continue the life cycle of fossil fuel burning plants and fossil fuel burning industry. It's a bit the same argument that people make against nuclear. Yes, in theory, low carbon emissions, but really expensive. And why should we invest in it when we have these cheap renewables that we can invest in right now without all of this lead time and without the big financing? Joop, let me put this question to you first. How do you answer those people who say, look, these projects, it's just not feasible and we shouldn't be wasting money on it?
Yeah, no, that is of course a fair question to ask, but it often is not reflecting reality. So what is the cost if we don't invest in those technologies? This is just something we have to do for those hard-to-abate sectors. It's very clear for the CCSA and other platforms in this field that we're not here to extend the license to operate of oil and gas companies with 1 day longer than necessary. This is not about this game. There are countries like Saudi Arabia who want to. I was at COP28 in Dubai, and then suddenly the Saudi delegation started talking about putting CCS in cars and at your home and I don't know where. And this is not the way forward. Our vision is really we need to electrify everything and only use CCS in those hard-to-abate sectors where you cannot avoid emissions. That's been said already time and time again. We just don't have sometimes an alternative to do that. Getting the conversation going in Brussels already proves difficult. So I started 6 months ago, and then I was explaining my energy geek friends that I was doing this, and they had no clue what this was about. And if already the energy people in Brussels don't know what CCS is, then you have a long fight ahead to convince the public audience that this is actually necessary. But it has happened. So in Denmark, there's been a broad political discussion about the need to add CCS to their, let's say, their climate vision, because the Danes realized only a few years ago, and they were really dead against CCS. They realized that they can build another wind farm and they would still have emissions. So the Danes had a proper political discussion, and now from left to right, there's now support for that. And actually, Denmark now has the potential to become a leading CCS market in Europe, along with the Norwegians and a few others. And even onshore, there's now actually there's possibility to do onshore storage of carbon. I think the onshore storage is a bit of a tricky thing. For instance, re-injecting carbon into depleted gas fields like in Groningen, where you have little earthquakes, could actually really help stabilize that soil. But people don't want it. So it's just a highly politicized topic. One project in Barendrecht in the Netherlands actually got aborted because there was so much local resistance and there was a lot of fake news and disinformation and everything. And it shows how sensitive it is. So I think that probably offshore storage is the most logical route. It's not the most cost-efficient route, but yeah, especially like in countries like Germany, where now the needle is shifting towards a more positive stance or less skeptical stance on CCS. The German government will still be dead against having onshore storage or storing it in the German waters. So we see a lot of movement in those countries, also in France and elsewhere. But we need also political parties to realize across Europe that we can only get so far there with the electrification vision.
Hanna, do you also hear this type of skepticism in the markets that you are operating in? And do you agree with Joop that because for political reasons or public perception reasons, it may be easier acceptance-wise to get offshore storage rather than onshore storage, not for practical reasons, but simply for public perception?
To start with the last question there, I think it very much depends on the region and the history and experience in the different parts. Of course, coming from Norway, we are so used to the activities in the offshore, and we have a lot of that competence and experience that would be with the reservoirs or the availability that we have, that would be the first choice. But I mean, there's so much happening if we're thinking about the carb fix as well. The technology of storing CO2 in basalt rock. I mean, there's so much innovation and developments going on. So I think we need to see a combination. And then, of course, it is the access to storage is crucial. And that could also be sort of, as we learn more about it and educate. I still have quite close friend of mine that still don't know what CCUS is. Back to the actually work we have to do when it comes to education, information and advocacy from us in the CCUS bubble. Otherwise, I agree with what you said when it comes to the oil and gas. I think it's a bit of a notion of the past. Again, a better understanding, at least in the circles that we discuss around the hard debate industries. And I would say the role in a more transitional phase when it comes to oil and gas. So until we have better battery capacity or storage opportunities when it comes to energy, we will see that the gas to power with CCS is probably going to be the most sensible thing to do. In the future, that is probably not so. Then we have other opportunities. But we can't wait for the perfect solution. That is what history has shown us, right? Yeah. If we had started 10 years ago, the route to decarbonization would have been easier for all of us. Now we really need to use the technology, the solutions that we have available today, and then we could also add on to that and take new innovations into use as they are there. But we can't wait.
Paulo, do you hear this type of skepticism in Italy?
Yeah, I think, the skepticism is there, but Joop and Hanne said basically the two key arguments to answer the skepticism. The first one is CCS is basically to address all of those emissions that cannot be basically avoided through electrification. I think Cedric mentioned it before, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, in the cement industry, 65% or let's say 60% of the emissions are process emission. It means that they don't come from combustion and you cannot avoid them. I mean, you can make maybe a little bit of optimization by changing the recipe of the cement, but in the end, it comes from the separation of the material, the raw materials that you use to produce cement. So those emissions will be there in any case, independently of electrification, hydrogen, any of the other levers for decarbonization that we obviously support, because we need all of them to basically achieve the target. So first of all, CCS is for emissions that cannot be avoided in other ways. And the second point is the power system, the electrification. So, renewables are great, but I speak quite often with the Italian companies which are basically active in the power generation. They run models to simulate how the electric system will look like in 10, 15, 25 years. And basically what they say is we will need at least 20% of flexible power generation capacity. And at least in Italy, that's going to be like gas-fired power generation. They improve the efficiency so that, for each molecule of gas that you use, you get more energy, so less emission. They will improve the working of the power station. But the point is, you will need those to enable the growth of renewables, because otherwise the system will basically collapse. And if you want to have that power generation clean, you will need probably to use, clean gas-fired power generation, which is, using CCUS. So the answer to your argument is CCUS is not a way to extend oil and gas life, but it's a way to enable the further development of renewables, which is basically our greatest lever to achieve the decarbonization of the system. So that's you have to look at the question the other way around. And if you go into the numbers and you do a little bit of simulation, the numbers are quite clear that that's the reality.
Cedric, what would you say to someone who says, look, you should really be investing in renewables and not wasting money on CCS?
We do.
Right.
So I think that's the point. CCUS is perhaps a little bit less controversial for energy-intensive industries for the reasons that Paolo explained correctly. And in our case, most of the CO2 that we capture is not fossil-related. It's not linked to energy combustion. It's linked to the so-called process emissions. Now, as I said before, CCUS is part of a decarbonization ecosystem. And unless I use all the decarbonization levers at my disposal before I look at the CCUS, it wouldn't be wise. So it's part of the solutions that we have at our disposal. It's part of the technologies that will enable us to get to net zero and put on the market fully decarbonized cement and concrete. But it's not a silver bullet. And we can't do it without investing in those levers, without investing in renewable energy, without investing in alternative materials, and so on and so forth. So yes, we need to pull at all the levers at the same time.
Okay, let's take some questions that have come in from the audience. Thanks for your questions. Again, put them into Slido and I'll ask them to the panel. For the first question, so I mentioned before that when I moved here, we talked about CCS. Now we're talking about CCUS. So Reza Madahi asks a pertinent question. Why CCS is preferred over CCU in the EU in terms of financial and regulatory incentives? Maybe, Joop, you could take that one. I mean, my inclination would be just because talking about CCU is a little bit more recent, a little bit more new, but what would you say?
Well, there is no CCU directive. There's a CCS directive. There are some, this is really geek speak, but there are some delegated acts on CCU, like how permanent is the permanence of storage? Should it be 35, 45 years before it becomes permanent? Because a lot of parties in this ecosystem say, like, you're not supposed to reuse the CO2 unless you really store it, like in cement, for instance, or some building materials, and then actually how long does the building material last? And will the CO2 in the end be reused or re-emitted into the air? There is hardly any as far as I know, there's hardly any legislation on CCU, and this is a new topic. And this also comes into play, like for the development of e-fuels. And this is an important debate that we need to have because we will need some kind of CCU, but is it a lot or is it not? Do we have really alternatives to sustainable aviation fuel? Shouldn't we maybe just capturing the CO2 that's emitted from those airplanes directly out of the air, which is cheaper than producing those e-fuels? These are all questions to which we don't have the answer yet, but this is about LCA, what's it, life cycle assessments of actually those products like e-fuels. What is the actual climate impact when you capture the CO2, put it in an e-fuel or make an e-fuel with it, and then actually burn it 10 kilometers up in the air? You still reduce the climate impact of that e-fuel, but how much is it? So this life cycle assessment needs to be taking place, and the Commission should really develop also its vision on CCU. And according to the again, what I said in the beginning is that by the 2040s they really expect the CCU part to take off. But also carbon is needed for the food and beverage industry to make bubbles, for instance. But also it's a feedstock, right, for the chemical industry. So that's also an important one. For the rest, I don't know a lot about CCU yet.
Yep.
I think core to this is that we will have far too much CO2 to use it. We need to store it to get it out of the natural cycle of the atmosphere and get it down to the normal levels. I think that is where we should add the focus, and also to convert or to use CO2 requires a lot of energy. And it doesn't really make sense to do that without using the proper renewable energy that we of course need to have access to.
And if I may add, this is part of the flexibility that we need. If you have, let's say, a cement plant near the Alps, and you have an industrial value chain that requires purified CO2 just down the valley, is it better to actually reuse it there and making sure it's used in a permanent removal fashion, or do you actually need to build the transport infrastructure that brings it to the North Sea and so on and so forth? So there's no universal answer, and each project, as I said, is different, and each project has a different value chain, and we will need the full portfolio of solutions used in storage across the market. That's where the industrial carbon management communication of the Commission actually brings a new chapter into the CCUS policy life in Brussels, is that it shows a vision on what is the role of storage, what is the role of use, and how do we combine it, and how do we do one, and how do we do it, basically.
Okay, next question is for Hanna. I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but Octav Bacius asks, when will the EEA countries, so Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, adopt the Net Zero Industry Act, and what will be the impact on the 50 megaton per year target and the individual contribution obligation for entities? As far as I'm aware, they do have to adopt it, but I guess the question is, when are they going to?
Yeah. On the timeline, I'm not sure. When it comes to the target, there has been a lot of discussions on that in Norway, of course, with the driver and expectation that it should be in addition. So, and hopefully matched it, but let's see what it comes to. But we should have a separate target when it comes to Norwegian storage capacity.
Okay, good.
The NZB is scheduled to be adopted in June.
Okay.
And then it will go into force once it's published immediately. And I think for the obligation part, the work will kick off in September, right? I'm just looking at Charles.
Yes, end of this year and then next year with first details.
Okay, so end of this year, next year, this obligation train will leave the station.
Okay, next question would be a good one for Paulo. This question is from Mattia Sala. What can be done on the emitter side to prepare for CCUS while waiting for the policy decisions? So maybe on the emitter side, while the infrastructure isn't there yet, what can they do in the meantime?
Well, I mean, let me answer this way. I mean, we are running now in Italy a market test, so a market procedure to basically ask the emitters to express their interest in the transport and storage of CO2 for our project in Ravenna. So basically we are asking questions about the volumes, let's say the characteristics, the components of their emissions, so how much CO2 is there, and their willingness to basically give these volumes for transportation and storage. And we are also asking whether they did some studies on the capture and whether they basically already have some evidence. What we are, I mean, that's a formal procedure, but generally speaking, must be aware that making a capture plant is not an easy thing. So it's not as easy as putting like a PV on the roof of your company. You need to consider that you have requirements in terms of space. You need to balance carefully both the energy and the heat at your plant, because you need to make sure that the cycle is good, and there is a lot of optimization that can be done. So my suggestion to the emitter, and like if I was speaking to Cedric and he was asking me what should I do, I would say, okay, contact Hanne and basically sit together, because you need to study what is the best basically setup for the capture plant, and then get in contact with let's say the project, the storage where you target to bring your CO2, so that you, since the beginning, you basically provide your volumes ambition. You basically provide the profiles of the volume, because you can imagine that for us as an infrastructure player, it's very important to know whether we get base load volume, so the same volume in every single hour, or whether we get like a profile with peaks and lower volumes, because that makes an impact in terms of the size of the infrastructure that we need to build. So for the emitter is get in touch with the capture provider and start studying what is the setup for your plant, and get in touch with the TNS provider in order to start from the beginning the communication of those parameters that are very important to project the project.
So aside from the obvious save up your money, attract investment, there's also lots of strategy things you need to do that you just listed. You need to really make the plan.
Then, obviously, you
then
need
also the obvious,
to care about the
get some
investment.
money. Okay, good. So the next question is for Joop. So this question is from Maud Baumann from Global Council. You mentioned the need for clear targets. The Net Zero Industry Act has provided one for 2030. What is it exactly that's missing in your view on targets? Do you want a longer term one, member state ones? So yeah, while the strategy doesn't have targets, the NZIA has. What do you need in terms of targets beyond what's in the NZIA?
So the target is we now have agreed, which is great. It's 50 million tons by 2030. This is tomorrow. So especially companies like the ones here sitting on this panel, they have, I guess you work in cycles of 7 years or something. The investment cycles can reach up to 15 years maybe, especially for infrastructure, you're talking about decades. So we need to have at least a 2040 target for storage. And also a clear vision of how much infrastructure needs to be there by 2040. Again, it doesn't need to be, let's say, a binding target, according to at least my own personal view, but we need to have this outlook of what size the market should be according to the Commission. I'm curious to hear what you think about that, but we need it's again a cliche, dot on the horizon, like where do we want to be with it? Because then we can start really building that market, and the Commission is really in the lead for doing that. And right now they've just given us projections when it comes to the storage.
Does anyone else, what are your thoughts on targets? What would you guys like to see?
No, I mean, I think that what Joop was saying is, especially for 2030, it's tomorrow. And when he was saying, 7 years, more or less, we are there, from when you take FID to where you basically start operation, you have like 5 to 7 years, depending a little bit on permitting. So if I can put one point, which is not, answering the question on targets, but what is one of the crucial phase that we didn't mention so far is permitting, and that's also. I have the Italian example, but also talking with the developers of other projects around Europe, they basically share the same view. So to achieve those targets, we need to, when we set the targets, let me put it this way, when we set the targets, we need to keep in mind that we are not talking about something that is deployable in a few months or a few years. So you have like investment cycles, and one of the enablers that will allow to shorten a little bit the time to operation is, making sure that permitting is, in the right time, because that could be like quite require a lot of effort.
Go ahead and then Cedric.
I think what is lacking is perhaps we have the storage target, but what about the capture side? And 2030 is still quite a few years for the emitters today. There are emitters that would like to move forward, that are quite mature in their approach and what they would like to do, but still no visibility of when will the storage and the infrastructure be in place and ready to receive the carbon. So match the 2030 with a capture target with, again, it comes back to the predictability for the emitters on how is this going to be looking like. And just to take the example in Norway, yes, we do have the first full value chain is being established now, but still it's very challenging for those emitters that wish to take part of that. Part of that is Norway is a long stretch country. We have rather small emissions compared to some of these first projects. They're quite large in volumes, 400,000 tons of emissions per year, and we see other projects are even higher than that in the years to come. But what about the emitters that is in the mid-range, 100,000 tons a year, 200,000 tons? Then it comes back to, okay, how could we combine it, making hub and that land-based infrastructure system to allow it to connect to either being a pipeline coming in place or a vessel coming to pick it up?
Cedric?
I think in parallel to the target setting discussion, I think where we need to look deeper is the operational understanding of the flows of CO2 that there will be in the economy from the demand side. It's a carbon economy, whether we like it or not. That's the way our physical world works. The Commission takes a bet that much of the carbon that we will need in the European economy will come from the atmosphere, will be captured directly from the atmosphere. There are different views on this. Something that is blue sky thinking, and the energy cost will be much too high. Others think that it can be provided by the economy, by the emitting sector from industrial non-fossil related CO2. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in understanding the flows and the future flows of CO2 and the indirect impact of those different options in order to characterize and perhaps get to targets which are closer to reality.
Okay, this next question, I'm not sure who to put it to. I guess I'll put it to Hannah, but if anyone else wants to answer it, go for it. The question is from Kieran Foster. Biochar is responsible for the vast majority of current carbon dioxide removal deliveries, yet it is left out of holistic strategies for CCUS. Why is this, and is there a long-term place for biochar carbon removals in your proposed approach to CCUS?
Yeah, so biochar that sort of contains the carbon. It's often put in the land agriculture to maintain there. So it's a bit different approach. If we look on the CDR strategies or technologies or ways to get there, it is sort of in that overview. But when it comes to the permanent removal, then it is the DAC that you mentioned and bio CCS that is in that space. I'm just thinking about the Oxford principles. It's a really good one to read more about this. Yeah, I don't know.
Does anyone else want to come in on that?
Oxford
I'm going to look it up.
Recommended.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're just about out of time. So I think before we wrap up, I'd like to get each of your thoughts, maybe in a 30-second takeaway here from today's conversation. You know, we're here in the heart of the EU quarter, next to the EU executive. What would be the number one thing that you need from policymakers here in Brussels to make the development of CCUS, to make this actually happen, both in terms of some of the practical things that we talked about, but also what we talked about, the financing. Cedric, I'll let you go first.
The one ask I have is there's a number of very mature projects out there which are developed from an engineering point of view, which are financed, which are developed in terms of the industrial partnerships that are needed. Let's make sure that those projects see the light. Let's not over-regulate everything. None of those projects are absolutely perfect, but they are first movers. They need to see the light. And let's develop these projects one after the other, and each cycle will be better. But let's start capturing, let's show that those mature projects are doable. Yes, we can, and let's show that it works.
Paulo?
Great point by Cedric. I'll put it this way. When the Commission works on CCS, we are talking about energy, and I think we are all aware about the trilemma. So, security of supply, affordability, sustainability. And after the Russian crisis, basically we got security of supply and affordability back on track, because before we were thinking about only sustainability. Let's make the trilemma become a quadrilemma and keep in mind also the economic return for the operators, because to make basically the decarbonization, you are asking the private sector to make very important and very large investment, and you need to make sure that basically these people and the people who want to invest in this technology see the economic return to their investment, which is a right economic return considering the risk which is underlying these investments, and make this project possible. The projects are there compared to 10 years ago. There are a lot of them ready to start, so let's make them start, keeping in mind that you have 4 basically pieces on the puzzle to make it work.
Hannah?
I think my ask have to be to support the fast followers for the projects now, because we need more of them to happen to show that this is happening. We talked a bit before we started here that CCS safaris is actually becoming a thing. And we need to have those projects to come in line, because that is the way both to get the hub developed, it gets the risks down because we have done it before, we have somewhere to connect it to. So the fast followers and cheering them.
And Joop.
Yeah, okay. Well, if there's one thing the Commission needs to do, it's to read our manifesto. So, yeah. No, but I think, well, yes, actually, they have to read it, but and follow up. But I think the most important thing here is, is to start building the infrastructure to support. I really believe that if you build the infrastructure and the storage there first, then those people will come with their emission. I think that will really unlock the chicken and egg situation that we're in. And I can see from so many different big emitters and small emitters that they really want to do it, but they are waiting for this infrastructure to get there. And there's a lot of appetite to build this infrastructure, but then de-risking it, so it's a bit of a cascading thing, but building the infrastructure, it's capture and then transport and storage, it's two different parts. Transport and storage, that is where we should actually prioritize, I think. Yeah. Plus all the other. Okay.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's discussion. I think what we've heard here is that this is an exciting time for CCUS because we are moving beyond the demonstration plant phase. We are seeing real projects going ahead, but maybe the perception out there isn't matching that reality. And as we kind of all mentioned here, we all know people, even in the energy sector, who are not really familiar with CCUS. So all the more reason to have more events like this to talk about it and address the concerns that are out there and really get a conversation going. So I want to thank our panelists for a great conversation. How about a round of applause for them? And if you are here in the room with us, I'd now like to welcome you out for a networking lunch. If you're joining us from home, I wish you an excellent rest of your afternoon, and thank you for spending your lunchtime here with us talking about CCUS. Take care.